Welcome to the Modern Intimacy Podcast, a show about mental health, sex, relationships, education and tips, and those private things we need to talk about more publicly without restrictions. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Balestrieri. A licensed psychologist, certified sex therapist, packed couples therapist, and sex addiction therapist, I know that mental health is directly tied to the quality of our relationships and our sex lives. I'm passionate in my desire to smash stigmas and shine a light on societal issues that may be negatively affecting our lives, relationships, and sexuality. During this podcast, I will also give you practical answers and insights to questions you've been wondering about. We should all have fulfilled, happy lives, and we get there by erasing shame, consciously digging deeper, building healthy connections, and by getting curious together. Thanks for joining me. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of Modern Intimacy Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Balestrieri. I have with me today a really special guest and friend, Randi Shover. Am I saying your last name right?
You are, yes.
Wonderful. You might know her from Feeling Randi, her TikTok and Instagram accounts, where Randi talks a lot about misogyny in general, and the misogyny that she's endured. And she's got an iconic laugh that she uses to really sort of hold a mirror up to the misogynists who come into her comment sections. So today, when I wanted to talk a little bit more about how not to be a misogynist, Randi seemed like the perfect person to have this conversation with. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
For our listeners, can you talk a little bit about how you got into your TikTok and what you experience in terms of misogyny to give those who don't know you some context?
Yeah, for sure. So I started my TikTok, like a year and a half, a little less than a year and a half ago. I guess it was a year in August, so a year and a couple of months. My intention in starting my TikTok was to talk about my experiences really in the dating world as a woman who had been married for a very long time. I got married young at the age of 22, and then 15 years later got divorced, dated somebody seriously after that, and then found myself at the age of 38 thrust into the dating world for the first time since 1999. And a lot had changed in that time. And starting the online dating and dating apps and the Tinder of it all. And so I was like, well, if I've had to learn all these things the hard way, there's other women out there who've probably had to learn those things the hard way, or maybe I can stop them from having to learn the hard way by talking about my experience and kind of what to expect and some of the things you'll encounter. And so I hadn't spent much time on TikTok before that. I didn't have an account. And so I went into it very naive. And I've had an Instagram account for years, and most of my Instagram followers are men who are, I would say, physically attracted to me. That's why they follow me. And so here I am on TikTok, and I upload my first couple of videos just introducing myself and what my intention is, and talking about my first kind of few experiences in the dating world. And my God, the hate from men that I got almost immediately.
Oh no.
Yeah.
What kinds of hate out of the gate did you receive?
A lot of, you're old and used up and now you want to help other women. This is pathetic. Or you're a failure at relationships and now you want to teach others how to be a failure. I got a lot of, you need to lay off the Botox. And I'm like, I've never even had Botox, so I guess thank you for that compliment. And so it was just a lot of comments on my appearance, which surprised me because I, usually get a lot of complimentary experience, like comments, especially on my Instagram. And so that was weird. And then just the whole, like, you're a failure kind of thing. And one of the first videos that kind of went, I grew pretty quick. I got like 10,000 followers within the first few weeks. And then it just kind of grew from there. But one of the first videos that kind of took off was explaining the two biggest problems that I had faced while dating. And that they were, one, being a successful woman is a detriment in a lot of instances when it comes to dating, because a lot of men feel insecure about that. And
Yes.
this wasn't something that I was like making up. It came out of their mouths, that
Mhm.
it was intimidating or whatever. And then the second one was just the natural sexuality that I happen to have. I pole dance for fun and fitness, and men really like that about me initially until they're dating me, and then they're like, I don't want you to be sexy anymore for anyone else. And so those two
Mm.
things quickly jumped out as a major problem. And if someone told me, your two biggest deterrents to getting into a relationship would be that you're successful and you're sexy, I would have been like, what?
That's a really
And
different expectation,
it
or different
is.
than what your expectations were. Yeah. What did you, how
Yeah.
did you think that men would respond to those two characteristics?
I thought they would be like, yeah, I can kind of see that. Or, I guess I thought I was dealing with rational men. The
Okay.
men of TikTok, by and large, no offense to the men who don't fall into this category, are extremely irrational. They're very triggered I think, by women speaking their truth.
Yes.
And so they all were like, no, it's because you're full of yourself. No, it's because you're too old. Like, you need to, explore more about what it is that is so off-putting about you. That's what it is. It's not that you are successful, and it's not that you're sexy. And I'm like, but they're literally telling me that it is.
Right, and I so appreciate those vulnerable men who could tell you that they felt insecure or
Yes.
inadequate, in contrast to your success, or in contrast to your ability to really be present with and to own your own sexuality. That can feel really scary for people. That doesn't mean that it's a bad thing and that you should stop, right? But I think what I hear a lot from you, from other female content creators, is that they are often shamed and degraded for the very things that men seem to be following them for and interested in. So there's a real dissonance when it comes to, I think, the two-dimensional nature of social media and people's capacity for impulse control and empathy when they see something that activates something inside of them, an emotion, a thought, something, a physical sensation, and their quickest reaction is to just put you down or shame you away, because it's easier, I think, sometimes than recognizing that the trait or the characteristic or the person behind the content is something or someone who they might want to be around, and they don't have access to that person or that characteristic.
That's so true. That's so true. And I think one thing I've really noticed about a lot of the men that I've encountered, both online and in person, is when they feel inadequate
Mhm.
or insecure, a lot of them will preemptively reject or lash out. It's
Mhm.
like, before you get a chance to reject me, I'm going to preemptively reject you. And it's the
Right.
weirdest thing I've ever seen. I don't know if women do that, but I've had so much experience with men doing that,
Mhm.
where they'll try to take you down a peg or two. Um, and I think it's, twofold. It's that whole pickup artist
Mhm.
bullshit where it's like, I'm gonna, degrade you so you'll date me, so you'll feel bad
Mhm.
about yourself and you'll be
Yep.
willing to lower yourself to date me. And also, it's like maybe they just don't know what to do with feeling inadequate or feeling insecure.
Yeah, I think those are two really common motives for that strategy. It's, let me make you think you aren't enough so that you'll see me as someone valuable and someone around whom you want to be, because then you feel good about yourself. But also, how dare you not think I'm so valuable? And how dare you not want to be with me? You are not great anyway. And so we see the double-edged sword of how misogyny can take place when it comes to initiating conversations with women, and the strategy that so clearly outlines fear, insecurity, and a desire to be in control when they really feel quite helpless and powerless in the situation of dating. And it makes sense, because if that's their approach, they've likely been rejected a lot, and it's not surprising.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Well, and I think too, you know, as a woman I'm 44, and I often would meet men that were my age, but maybe hadn't gone as far in their life as they were hoping. And they looked at that as, some kind of slight on them, instead of like it being a pro on my behalf. It was like, no, 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 you can't be more successful than me, because that's not what society has told me. And people my age in particular, we were fed a line that this is what the life is going to look like for you. That, if you have a job and you have a pulse as a man, you deserve a woman. And women have evolved so quickly, I feel like, over the last 50 to 60 years. The minute we were allowed to all of a sudden have our own bank accounts and take loans out in our own name, and kind of have a little bit more autonomy, we're like slowly but surely, and I think it's accelerating, deciding, what, I don't have to put up with this bare minimum effort, I don't have to do what I don't want anymore, because I have the ability to do these things for myself.
Right. They're no longer dependent on men socially,
Yes.
financially, in all of the ways that they were before.
Yeah. And so I think that makes a lot of men who were told they were going to have some kind of, reward, or, life that they deserved, they don't get that anymore. That, it's not their grandfather's world anymore. Thank God. and so I think it's hard for some of them to accept. And so they lash out. And whew, I was, like I said, unprepared for the lash out.
You're uppity, right? And I say that with love and reverence, because I'm also uppity. And what I mean by that is you've broken out of the role in which you were supposed to, in air quotes, play.
Yep.
And there's a really interesting article, the author, I can't remember her name right now, but it's called The Sexual Harassment of Uppity Women. And in it, she talks about how women who do not adhere to the more traditional gender roles tend to face more harassment, especially sexual harassment. So it makes a lot of sense to me that on your social media, where you do just step right into your power and speak from the heart, and you're very embodied and you take no shit, that you don't conform to this role that you're supposed to, again, air quotes, be in. Therefore you can't be controlled. And so what can't be controlled, or who can't be controlled by men who are like this, they have to try to, in their minds, degrade the target, demolish it, make it go away. And they do that by trying to levy these really volatile and vitriolic comments, and do anything they can to discredit you, make you feel small, make you feel bad. And in that way, they're trying to hold on to some semblance of self.
Oh, yeah. So true. So true.
So for the folks who are listening who want to challenge misogyny within, because we all have some, right? Whether it's externalized or internalized, we've all learned to be misogynistic because we've grown up in a patriarchal society. So let's think a little bit about, how can people not be misogynistic? What are some tips that we might offer so that we can really be productive in challenging this within ourselves, and if faced with it?
Yeah.
So what's one way that you can think of?
Yeah. And I'll preface that with one thing, that the misconception that feminism is about demonizing men, and that it's about making women superior to men, or that we don't like men or masculinity. That is not what it is. We just want to be treated with humanity. And when you come at a woman from a misogynistic place, it removes our humanity. And so with that, one of my big one, can I swear on this podcast?
Of course, yes.
I fucking hate the term female when referring to women. This female, that female, I dated a female. It's like, a female what?
Exactly.
A dog?
I'm so glad that you brought this up. So a couple of days ago on my TikTok page, I duetted a woman who is an English copywriter, I think, or a professional writer of some sorts. And she was talking about how she edits and writes for medical and other professional articles, right? And she said, let's be really clear. People who use the term females are being misogynistic, whether they know it or not, because the correct use of the term females when it's applied to humans is as an adjective. So you can say the female police officer or the female baker or the female student, and that's okay. It's an adjective to describe a human, and the noun is the human role, right? But when we
Yes.
use that word as a noun to talk about humans, it's incorrect,
Yep.
grammatically incorrect. And a lot of people in my comments were like, but it's a noun, look up the dictionary. Two things. We have to remember that the dictionaries were written by white men, so
Mm-hmm.
they're already biased.
Yep.
Two, there's nuance and context. So it is a noun when we're talking about plants and animals. We refer to dogs as females. We refer to cows as females. I mean, or they're bulls, then they're males. But we don't call
Yes.
humans females because that's the context and the nuance of language.
Yes. No, exactly. And it's reductive, right? It's
Mhm.
reducing us down to our biological parts, um, sexual organs, so to speak. And more than anything, women don't like it, so maybe just stop. Like that
Yeah.
should be enough. That should be enough of an answer right there.
Completely. I mean, some women were in my comment section saying, I don't mind, it's not that deep. And the thing is, it is that deep
It
because
is.
even if you don't know the history of the word or don't think about it from a deeper perspective, it doesn't mean it doesn't have really gnarly origins. And in fact, my understanding of the origin of the way this word was used to describe women is that it came from one of the earliest OBGYNs who was actually running experiments and doing research on Black women. And so, to create a bit of a buffer in polite society, he started calling them females
Ugh.
instead of women. Right. So it has racist and misogynistic undertones to it. And I don't think many people really know that. So when we're talking about women, I implore everyone, it's a really simple vocabulary shift. Move from calling them females to women.
Yes, no, and it's not hard. And the thing is, I see some of the, more misogynistic men on TikTok make videos, and they're
Mm-hmm.
very particular about their language, where
Mm-hmm.
they refer to men as men
Mm-hmm.
and women as females, and they're using those terms at the same time. So
Mm-hmm.
I know this man who went out with this female, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
you're doing that very purposefully.
Right, right. And some of them might just be doing it because this is the language in which they've been socialized. And so this is the language that they just use without really thinking about it. But when we know better, we do better.
Yep.
And it started from misogynistic intentions. So it's super important to challenge that when it comes up, and even if it comes out of your own mouth.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I've dated a couple of guys in the military before.
Mhm.
I would not do that again. No offense, thank you for your service, but anyway, um, and they would call me or women females, and I called them
Mhm.
on it, and they're like, "Well, that's just what we do in the military." I was like, "I don't care."
But
Like,
let's think about why. Why is that what they do in the military? It's
yeah,
to dehumanize and to
yes,
de-identify soldiers. So thank you
yes,
for proving the point.
yeah, right. It's like that's nice. It's time to learn better, right? Do
Yeah,
better.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to our next tip. You mentioned before the conversation about body count. This is a very misogynistic
Yeah.
conversation, so let's talk about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the other big one that I got a lot from the men of TikTok was body count, and oh, you've been ran through and now no one wants you. And it's like, do you know how women's bodies work? That
I
shit's a
don't.
muscle, right? Like the more we use it, the tighter it can get. Hello. And so, yeah, if first of all, it's none of anybody's goddamn business. That's my first answer to that whole thing. and
Hmm.
and it does not dictate value at
Not
all.
at
We're
all.
not cars with miles on it. We're not
Right.
objects. We're human beings.
Hmm.
I have two children, one of which was a C-section, one of which was vaginal birth.
Hmm.
And that shit snapped back after pushing a head out. So your penis is not going to have the impact you think it's going to have. And so I just, yeah, I hate that so much. And if a man, first of all, no man has ever dared ask me that in person. It's this, it's the world of the online troll, right? If a man dared ask me that in person, I would never talk to him again, because that's stupid.
No. And they know better, right? And when
Yeah.
you're in person with somebody, it's a really different experience. You get the biofeedback of their reaction in the moment, right? So some may be that brazen. I certainly see a lot of folks asking those questions in interview format on social media. And I think they're trying to get clout and trying to be oppositional and do the things that make them seem very masculine. But what I've never had that be a real conversation for anyone in my dating life, but I'm also very loud about being a feminist, so I probably don't draw in those kinds of men. But certainly a lot of men do have this feeling that if a woman has had many sexual partners, even just a few, that somehow changes her worthiness or her ability to be a good sexual partner. And that has some deep roots in purity culture.
Yeah.
And the myth of purity.
Yes. And I was raised Mormon. I'm from Utah, raised Mormon, and purity culture was all I knew. Abstinence, and I was given the lesson when I was in Young Women's, which is what you go into when you turn 12 and you essentially graduate when you're 18. Several lessons on my purity being my only source of value, and the analogy of chewing gum. Everybody wants a fresh piece of gum. Now, if I chew this gum, who's going to want it now? And if you have sex before marriage, you are a chewed piece of gum that no one will want. Another analogy was a licked cupcake. And so that was the world I grew up in. And as somebody who never fit in, who was always bucking, authority and the not doing what I was told, I was like, this is bullshit. but it did not, I did not realize the full impact that had on me until, really within the last couple of years, and have had to unpack that. But yeah, the purity culture is bullshit. Virginity is a social construct. Yeah, it's whether you've had 0 sexual partners or 500, as long as you don't, as long as you're safe and take care of your physical health, it doesn't matter. And as long as those things were consensual, it doesn't matter. Right. And it doesn't change your body. It doesn't, make you loose. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't, you don't blow out your vagina.
That's the biggest dissonant element of this conversation for me. The same men who will talk about body count have no problem having sex 100 times with a woman.
Yes.
But they think that if a woman has sex with 50 men or 100 men one time, that somehow is going to change her body. And I think what it really speaks to is an element of shame around their own sexuality. And this idea that if other men have been here before, they've left something on this person. I've heard men say the most ridiculous things about how women actually absorb their DNA after they ejaculate. They're just really uninformed. They're really uninformed.
Yes. Well, and I had a couple of videos that were taken down for bullying and harassment because I was clapping back about pair bonding, and because that was like a big thing that a lot of these misogynistic dating coaches were going on about, that a woman who has too many sexual partners, which what's too many, no one knows, loses the ability to pair bond. And I was like, first of all, pair bonding was studied in prairie voles. I am not a prairie vole, are you? And and it's literally the prairie vole releases oxytocin when the male prairie vole engages her cervix. And it's as simple as that. And, we produce oxytocin for a wide variety of reasons. And just because we produce it doesn't mean one day, you've run out. You're not going to produce anymore. Because the same thing happens when you breastfeed your baby. You produce those bonding hormones, and
And when you give
By
birth.
and when you give birth, all these
Mhm.
things, and by that logic, it would mean, well, once I have one baby, all my other kids are shit out of luck because I'm out. I'm out. It's just
Right.
it's silly. It's based in shame. It's based in control. I think a lot
Yes.
of the men that push that narrative want control. I think a lot of them also push it because they know that if she has a lower body count, and I use that term facetiously, um, that she likely is young.
Yes.
And the younger you are, maybe it's a little easier to control you, and maybe it's also easier for her to think you're the best because she doesn't know any better.
I mean, can you remember your earliest sexual partners and how what that experience was like compared to what it might be like now?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, god. Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
was like four pumps and done, and I'm like, wait, what?
Right. So, I mean, it makes sense from an insecurity perspective that there would
Yeah.
be so much focus on the idea of body count. And also, I think one thing that a lot of men who are really up in arms about this conversation don't necessarily know is that men were actually the people who pushed for monogamy. We were never really a monogamous species. We lived in communities, and I think it was around the start of the agricultural revolution that we started to live separately. And that's when men started to feel like, wait a minute, I don't know if I'm taking care of children that are my own. So I think I need to lock this up and make sure that I'm only working for my own offspring, which makes a lot of sense. But it doesn't mean that it's a biological truth, right? It's really a failure to recognize the influence of social structures and the ways in which the patriarchy shifted when it partnered up with capitalism, and when it partnered up with all of these ways in which men started to protect their own interests and started to dehumanize women more aggressively.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about another tip. Um, you mentioned in our earlier conversation the friend zone. So let's talk
Oh,
about why this is misogynistic to be offended if you are put in the quote unquote friend zone.
yes. So the friend zone doesn't exist. First, I'll say that the friend zone. So either you're a friend or you're pretending to be a friend in order to have
Right.
sex with or access to something that she's not willing to give you, right? So this idea that women keep men around as friends and friend zone them, um, is ridiculous. And men who whine about the friend zone are typically the same ones who are whining about, but I'm a nice guy.
Yes.
The nice guy trope, right? And yeah, it's a very frustrating thing. It's like, well, how do you think it feels to, like, have feelings for this person and she just wants to be your friend? Well, how do you think it feels to think you have a friend and it turns out you don't? You just have somebody who's been biding their time waiting to get into your pants.
Yeah.
And so you're either friends with a woman or you're not.
That's right.
That's really
That's
it.
right. Yeah. And I think it really does speak to the sometimes conscious, but also mostly unconscious ways that men expect women to be available to them sometimes. And being put in the quote unquote friend zone is one of those ways. It's like, wait a minute, I want this from her. Why isn't it something that's available to me? Why isn't she, and even to quote your language, giving it to him? We don't give
Mm-hmm.
sex to people.
Mm-hmm.
We co-create a pleasurable experience. We don't, sex isn't something that you just hand them in a box, like, here you go, here's my sex. It's something that you do together. And that's, I think, a big part of why so many men feel like they're being pushed aside unjustly, because they do think that sex is to be given to them if they just perform the role of good guy and the role of good enough and the role of good intentions. But they don't have good intentions when they are duplicitous in this manner. And women can feel that, and they can feel that there is often a lack of authenticity in those friendships, I'll put that word in quotes too, because they sense that there's like something more that's wanted. And I was just watching a TikTok video the other day that was just heartbreaking. A woman was talking about how she was moving to a different state, and she always thought she had so many great guy friends. But within the last 2 weeks of her being where she lived, all of them shot their shot with her and were frustrated that they missed their opportunity to have sex with her. And she was crying in the video and talking about how she was devastated because she thought these men were friends. She went to them for advice. She thought she had integrated them into her life. And it turns out they were all just hanging around hoping to get a quick dip. And that's a very non-clinical way of saying that, but
Yeah.
that's how it feels.
Yeah, yeah, no, a quick dip. I mean, that's pretty much what it is, right?
Yeah.
And it is. It's just it's sad. It's sad. I mean, certainly it sucks for, to want someone or like someone um, in a way that it's not reciprocated. Certainly that
Yes,
sucks.
it
But
does.
but to hang around and pretend like you're someone's friend in the hopes that she'll change her mind is it's unfair. And and you're also not doing yourself any favors by doing that either, because I feel like when what I see most often is this real bitterness in men
Mm-hmm.
who feel like they've been friend zoned, like
Yeah.
they've been harmed in some way. And it's like, no, she just is not interested in you in anything other than a friendship. And
Yeah.
either take the friendship for face value, or just say, I'm sorry, I feel like I can't just be your friend because I want more.
Yeah,
Simple.
absolutely. Absolutely. But that would require vulnerability, and that can be very challenging for anyone, but especially for men who are consistently told not to feel vulnerable. So I get it. And I think so many men also have not really had to or have wanted to think about the ways that their socialization into masculinity has created some entitlements. Most of us don't want to think about ourselves as being entitled. That's not a flattering view. But when we look at the privilege of masculinity and the toxic elements of it, there's a tremendous amount of entitlement over the experience of women and the service of women, if you'll call it that.
Yeah, and I think if your mindset is that, women are somehow lesser than, or there's some kind of control or ownership piece of it too. I think a lot of men
Mhm.
feel like, they should have some control or ownership over women.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, then a woman not doing what you want, not living up to the expectations in your mind is like, I'm sure, very difficult to deal with.
Mhm.
But it's like, welcome to being an adult. We have to kind of deal with those things all the time. And it's just, again, it's like, I feel like if you care for and respect somebody as a person, as a human being, then you wouldn't worry about the friend zone.
Yeah.
You wouldn't worry about, you would respect the fact that she's not into you that way.
Mhm.
And frankly, don't hang around hoping that she will change her mind, because that
Yes.
doesn't happen very often. It may happen in movies, but it doesn't happen in real life very often.
It's so true. And I think part of the reason why some men feel so embittered when they do hang around and their desire to be more than friends doesn't materialize is not even so much that they're mad at her for not reciprocating their unrequited fantasy. I think they're mad at themselves because they don't value themselves enough to walk away and
Right.
to go bring their energy somewhere else. And sometimes I think it's their relationship with themselves is such that maybe they don't think very highly of themselves in general. So they were looking at being with this woman as a way to feel vindicated, validated, or good enough. So when she says no, it's not even really about missing out on the opportunity to be with her. It's about missing out on the validation that being with her would provide. And that's, again, why it can be such a misogynistic demand and expectation. I was recently reading this book called Burnout by Emily Nagoski. Highly recommend if you haven't read it already for anyone listening. It's a book that talks about the weight of the patriarchy on women and our health and our nervous systems, and how living in a patriarchal system creates so much somatic burnout in our bodies. And she's 1000% correct in her analysis of how the patriarchy impacts women and their health. But one of the things that she cited is actually Kate Mann's work in the book Down Girl, where she talks about how in a patriarchy, men are seen as the human beings and women are seen as human givers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there is this unconscious expectation that women are to give of themselves to the beings. And it is costing women their lives because the stress of that every day, the stress of all of those expectations and manipulative efforts to get what is needed from them, what is supposed to be in air quotes, given to them, given to these beings, it takes such a big toll on us that we have higher rates of all kinds of health problems, mental health and physical health as a result. So misogyny is not just something, funny to laugh at on TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
or when you hear someone talking about it, I really implore you to challenge anyone who talks about it's not that deep, because it is. It has huge, far reaching, and long lasting implications on the lives of women and femme presenting people, and on men too, whether or not they want to admit it.
And that's the wild part, right? Is the significant detrimental impacts that patriarchy and subsequently misogyny have on men. And I have a video where I did a deep dive into the different waves of feminism and what they mean, and kind of trying to undo, like what I said at the beginning here, of that feminism is about man hating. We want men to be free too. We want men to be have access to their full emotional range, and to be able to cry and be able to exhibit really any anger or any emotion other than just anger, or you can either be happy or you can be mad, men. That's about it. And that's so unfair. And I think along those lines, little boys within our society have the feminine aspects of them essentially beat out of them, right? By being constantly told the worst thing you can be is a girl. The worst thing you can do is act like a girl, or be a pussy or a sissy or whatever. And so, they internalize that. And then that means, well, girl means bad. Girl means wrong. Feminine is bad. So I'm going to lash out. But then I'm also going to take traits that have been, for whatever dumb reason, have been gendered to be feminine traits, empathy and kindness and warmth, all those things that have been gendered as feminine. They stop engaging with those traits and using, which is really all they are, is just the full human experience.
Exactly.
And so I would love it. I would love it so much if men were freed from that too. But back to what you were saying about that book. First of all, I need to read that.
Both of them are
Because
great.
yes, because I have been feeling that so heavy lately. And I also talked about in a video of mine the damage that marriage has on women.
Yes.
And mostly it was like the more proximity to men women have, the harder it is on us. But the more proximity men have to women, the easier it is on them.
Yeah.
And that the men folk hated that video, first of all. Women were like, this is facts, and men were like, lies. But but it goes back to exactly what you were saying from that book, that there's a physical impact,
There is.
to women, a health impact to women, when you are, when the expectations of men are placed on you at all times.
Absolutely. And when it is the expectation that you give of yourself, we are not giving trees, and no one should be.
Yep.
And that is sometimes the way it feels as a woman in a patriarchal society, because everywhere I go, I'll just speak for myself, there is an expectation put on me that I should be available in some way, whether it's giving my keys to the valet. There's a flirtation that comes
Yep.
across his face. Now, this isn't to, knock anyone. I appreciate if somebody is attracted to another person, but if I don't
Reciprocate.
respond in a way that's kind and polite when all I want to do is go have dinner with my girlfriends,
Mm-hmm.
if I don't entertain that and soothe the letdown, my car might get dented
Yep.
on bringing it back. And that is a real minor problem, right? There are women who are physically assaulted, who are murdered because they didn't respond in the way that men expected them to. And it's dangerous out there. And that is such I think a point that I really want to drive home here is that, again, misogyny has real consequences and perpetuates this entitlement. And when women really think about it, now there are many women who maybe aren't aware, or they haven't given themselves permission to think about it as critically, because the reality is, once you see it everywhere, and it
You
is
do.
exhausting. It's
Yes.
exhausting. So I get it for the women who just say, no, la, 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 I hear no evil, see no evil, speak
Yeah.
no evil. I understand that as their body protecting them from grieving a reality that is really unkind to them. And when I think about sort of the weight of that and the fatigue of that, it makes a lot of sense that we're seeing women who are in their happiest moments, single and either child free, or their children have grown up and left the home, when they don't have those expectations on them all the time.
Oh yeah. I mean, I stopped dating a year and a half ago, and it's been the best thing I've ever done for myself because
Mm-hmm.
I realized how much emotional turmoil I was constantly in trying to, I mean, dating is just a nightmare anyway, but trying to play the game,
Mm-hmm.
give them the response that they want. It's constant. You don't really think about how much of a physical toll it takes on you to have
Mm-hmm.
to be up and on all the time. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
go to a lot of conferences for work, and I'm always exhausted after, and I'm like, why? I didn't really do anything, but it's because you're having to perform at all
Mm-hmm.
times. And that's what it's like being a woman. You have to perform,
Mm-hmm.
or there's risk.
Yeah.
And so I'm the first one to advocate that women be single. That's like, I'm like, every time a woman's like, oh, my husband's doing this, I'm in the comments like, dump him. um, because I feel like like you said, we're human givings, right? We have to give and give and give. And there's only so much
There's
we
only
can
so much
take.
to give. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
And
you
and
run out.
and you do, right? And you run out, and this is a big part of why women do initiate divorce more frequently than men do, because they give and 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 give, and then they have nothing left to give
Yep.
and nothing left to grieve. And they've been hoping and waiting for their partner to see them as full humans and to respect them as full humans and to show up in a more mutual way. And they don't. And a lot of it is because of the ways that men have been socialized. I don't think that all men are bad guys, right?
Mm-mm.
But all men have been socialized to be masculine in ways that include misogyny, much in the same way that all white people have been socialized to be racist under the systems of racism in our country, in our
Yes.
world. We have to take responsibility for that. It doesn't make us bad people, but we do have to deconstruct and do the work and move out of these ways of automatic thinking and start asking ourselves, how am I approaching this situation? Can I be more humanizing? And the answer is always yes.
Yes, no, absolutely. Because I mean, and men are socialized and conditioned to with misogyny, and so are women,
So are
right?
women, yeah.
And and I think about my own internalized misogyny that I have been unpacking really for the last 10 years, but really diving a lot deeper in the last 5,
Mm-hmm.
because I was the ultimate pick me woman. Because I was taught that's how you stay safe, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you align yourself with those in power, and that proximity to power can maybe protect you. until it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Until it doesn't. And
Right.
it's not real power. It's adjacent to power. And so it wasn't until I realized that by aligning myself with other women, especially, I mean, I've spent most of my career in construction, and it's all men. Most of the time I was the only woman in any room. And there were a couple of women, and when I first started in my career, it was like, women are the enemy. There's only so much space for us. There's only space for one of us. And then I started to think, why do I think that? And it's the way I was socialized. It's the way we're, if we're busy fighting amongst ourselves, the men can get away with a whole bunch of shit. And so it wasn't until I realized that if her and I, the other woman that I was working with at the time, if her and I aligned with each other and had each other's backs, what could happen? And everything changed. Everything changed. And so, and just the same thing with white supremacy, like you mentioned, right? And racism, it's there. It's indoctrinated, and it's up to us to change it. And
it is.
And men can and have, and I've seen lots of them, and there's really some really amazing content creators on TikTok and other platforms of men who have really, really done that work.
Yes.
And so it's possible. You just have to want to. And I think that's the biggest problem right now, is that there's men who don't want to change it because they like being in power.
Right. So I think you bring up such a great point here. There has to be motivation. So what could possibly be the motivation for somebody who does reap so many benefits of maintaining a misogynistic or patriarchal worldview to change?
Yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate question, right? And to me, the benefit would be, what would it feel like if I didn't feel like the world is on my shoulders? As a single mom, who is the oldest daughter, and you just did a fantastic post on oldest daughters, and I actually had a mini meltdown yesterday morning, thinking about all the ways that since I was 6 years old, because by the time I was 6, I had 3 younger siblings. That was the moment I stopped being a child and started being a caregiver. And men are socialized to think that, they're the protectors and the providers. We hear that constantly. And it's like, God, isn't that boring? Don't you want to be more than that? Don't you want to be less than that? Like,
don't you want to be free from that?
That's
the thing that always comes up for me. It's like, okay, I understand maybe that's what you were told you were supposed to be, but what does that entail?
Yeah.
Because what I see in clinical practice when I work with men, either single or in partnerships, is often a resentment for being in that role.
Yes.
They're mad that their partner may or may not be contributing as much financially. They don't understand why they should help with the domestic labor in the household because they have this financial contribution, and they think that usurps everything else.
Yes.
These men are angry about being in that role. They're resentful, but they don't want to walk away from it because it's such a pillar of what defines masculinity in their minds from what they've been told. But there is so much liberation for men who put that down and find meaning and identity in other ways. I work with so many men who would call themselves recovering misogynists. And I have to tell you, the transformation is beautiful.
Love it.
They come back, after a few months of being in therapy, they're having the best sex of their lives with their partners. There's like such a difference in the way they communicate with each other. They feel more respected, which is ironic because all they've wanted from the start was to feel respected. But the ways that they were told to get that respect actually left their partners respecting them less.
Yeah.
So we work on changing all of that and creating an egalitarian mindset. And the transformation that they see is super rewarding.
Well, and that's the thing that really is wild to me, is that especially straight men, right? I mean, we're by and large talking mostly about straight men here, men that want to date women or marry women or have sex with women, whatever. And they are doing all the things they possibly can to turn us off, to piss us off, to push us to the point where I have historically had a very high libido, and over the last year and a half I'm like, ugh, gross. And because I've just had too many bad experiences. But men who give respect, get respect, men who engage with their partner from a human to human level.
Yeah.
They drop the macho bullshit.
Yeah.
The
It's
the
not a performance.
Yeah, it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's just be, right? And those guys are like super happy, and they're
Yeah.
not on TikTok calling women ugly and fat,
So true.
and calling women ran through, and they're in good relationships. So why don't men look at men who are in these happy relationships, who have unpacked their misogyny, like have gone through the programs you're talking about? Why can't men out there who are wanting to be in a relationship but are angry that they're not, why don't they look to them as the pillars instead of men like Andrew Tate?
Well,
Why is that happening?
so in my other podcast, Without Consent, we talk about this in the Andrew Tate phenomenon, because a lot of these men, they want to be in relationship with a woman. That's what they say.
That's
They
what
don't
they
want
say.
to they don't want to be in relationship with a woman. They want a woman to be next to them, right? They want the what is it? The accessory of a woman.
Mm,
They want her as a prop to shore up their sense of masculinity. See, I've got her. She's
yeah.
mine, and therefore I'm more elevated. And this is not a phenomenon that really, in my opinion, is related to a mother wound in so much as it's related to a father wound. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the real grift of the patriarchy for many men, is that the patriarchy kept their fathers emotionally distant, sometimes physically distant. And so they grew up with a real yearning for that male validation and for the sensation and the feeling of being good enough in their father's eyes. But because the patriarchy eclipsed their father's ability to be emotionally demonstrative and caring and warm with these young men, a lot of them adhere to this script of masculinity because, on some level, they're trying to say, Dad, am I man enough yet? Can you love
Mm-hmm.
me? Can I be part of your crew? And so, men like Andrew Tate, and there are a bunch of other ones, because let me just be really clear, Andrew Tate is not special and
Mm-mm.
he's not unique. And whenever his sound bites dry up, there will be another one who pops up in his place. Um, they're able to take that place because there is a hunger
Mm-hmm.
for some sort of strong father role model. And men with wealth, or when men who talk about having a lot of sex with women, these are the old tropes of masculinity, and they're easy. And these men are being manipulated by the promise of being good enough if they model these behaviors. But modeling these behaviors keeps them more and more isolated, more and more afraid, more and more limited in their human experience, and they get really angry. And then they're more vulnerable to further manipulation by these men who say, be angry at women, it's their fault, when in fact they're being exploited by the very men they seek to admire.
So true, and so like perfectly stated, that it's the male validation, the father's approval that they're missing, and that's why
Mm-hmm.
they're, men like Andrew Tate and Kevin Samuels. I mean, there's a boatload of them.
Mm-hmm.
There's copycats of them. I see a new
Mm-hmm.
one on TikTok. There's so many of them, and they all have the same goddamn message, that all of the plights in your life, all of the things that are wrong, all of the, it's all women's fault.
Mm-hmm.
And follow me, let me teach you
Right.
how to use, abuse, and manipulate women, and then you'll be fine. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I wish we had more access to mental health care for, the youth of
I do
the
too.
US, the world.
Yeah.
I feel like if we were able to address those things when kids are real little, it would change everything. I tell every woman I know that has sons, please raise your sons to be a feminist. And
Mm-hmm.
that gets a lot of pushback. And I'm like, that's not a dirty word. That just means you're
Yeah.
raising your son to care about women as humans.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you don't like the word feminist, maybe you could try on the word humanist, right?
Yeah.
So somebody who just really sees human beings as equal and valuable and shares the interconnected experience of what it means to be a human, because we all are. And that gets so lost when we start sitting in these polarized roles of male, female, men, women, dominant, submissive. I mean, that stuff's only fun if it's consensual and in the bedroom.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Randy, thank you so much for coming onto my podcast and talking about this with me. I feel like we could have 7 more conversations about this. So I hope you'll
Yes.
come back and we can do this again.
Absolutely. Anytime. It
Amazing.
was a pleasure. Yes.
Thank you. And where can people reach you if they want to be in contact with you, your work, or even your upcoming podcast?
Yes. So on TikTok and Instagram, I'm at feelingrandy78. And then my podcast will be Feeling Randy and something. I'm still working it out, but I will be launching that. I set myself a date of December 15th. So
Amazing.
that's my date for getting it launched. But yeah,
Wonderful.
thanks so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And stay tuned for the next episode of Modern Intimacy. You can always check us out on our website, modernintimacy.com. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Kate Balestrieri. And you can also find Modern Intimacy on Instagram at The Modern Intimacy. We've got lots of free information, psychoeducation, downloadable tips, documents, handouts, things to work on. So check it out. All right. See you next week, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Intimacy Podcast. On Instagram, follow me at Dr. Kate Balestrieri and at The Modern Intimacy. On TikTok, check me out at Dr. Kate Balestrieri and on Twitter at Kate Balestrieri. Everyone has questions about mental health, sex, and relationships. Send yours to me via DM on Instagram or email them to questions@modernintimacy.com and I'll answer some at the end of each episode. Visit the website, modernintimacy.com, to schedule a consultation with a member of our team or to sign up for our newsletter. Let's meet back here next week. New episodes air every Tuesday. Reminder, this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for mental health services.